"Do you know what your company fired my father for?" Layla asked, holding up a hospital wristband with one hand and a photograph with the other. In the picture, Isaiah Turner was kneeling on asphalt, pressing both hands into Robert Grant's chest. Evelyn stared from the broken security badge to the termination letter in her hand. Michael Prescott stepped forward. "This meeting is over." Layla tightened her grip. "He was saving your father." 3 hours earlier, the factory horn cut through the gray morning like a blade. Isaiah ran toward the employee entrance as the steel gate began sliding shut, his metal toolbox striking his thigh with every step. The air smelled of diesel, hot wiring, and the bitter coffee spilling from a paper cup beside the guard station. "Doug, hold the gate." Shift supervisor Doug Harris looked at the clock mounted behind the glass. Its red second hand crossed the 12. He pressed the control button. Steel met steel with a heavy clang inches from Isaiah's chest. Workers on the other side slowed but did not stop. Isaiah stood breathing hard, his Navy technician's jacket unzipped and one knee darkened with road dust. A thin brown-red stain had dried between the seams of his left work glove. 6:58, Doug said, keeping his voice measured. "Your shift began at 6:50. 8 minutes late." Isaiah reached into his pocket and unfolded a damp scrap of paper. An ambulance unit number, a street name, and 6:42 a.m. had been written across it in hurried blue ink. One corner carried the faint print of his blood-marked thumb. There was a man down on Fulton Road. Doug did not take the paper. Anyone can write numbers on a receipt. Isaiah glanced through the gate at the production floor. Fluorescent lights burned above the conveyor line, and several men he had trained were watching without meeting his eyes. His cracked wristwatch had stopped at 6:44. "Call the ambulance unit," Isaiah said. "They'll confirm it." Doug's polite expression barely shifted. "You can explain yourself to human resources." A sharp piece of metal lay near the front wheel of an approaching forklift. Isaiah saw it, crouched, and picked it up before the tire reached. He dropped it into the scrap bin, then lifted his toolbox again. Doug watched the gesture with a small frown, as though even that quiet act irritated him. 2 floors above, Evelyn Grant stood beside a glass conference table while her father's hospital called for the 3rd time. "Ms. Grant," the doctor said through the speaker, "your father has been admitted to intensive care. His condition remains critical." Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Across from her, Chief Operating Officer Michael Prescott slid a digital personnel summary toward her. "I know this is difficult timing," he said softly. "This only requires your authorization. Repeated attendance misconduct. Standard termination. Operations and HR have already reviewed it." Evelyn looked at the name, Isaiah Turner. The letters blurred for half a second as the doctor asked whether Robert Grant had an advance directive. "Is this urgent?" she whispered. "Consistency is urgent," Michael replied. "Exceptions create liability." She pressed her signature to the screen. Downstairs, Doug took Isaiah's badge from its lanyard and bent it until the plastic cracked. Isaiah did not raise his voice. He only folded the ambulance paper carefully and returned it to his pocket. As security led him toward human resources, the factory clock clicked forward another minute. On Evelyn's tablet, the signed termination summary closed, revealing, for less than a second, a line Michael had not mentioned. For supporting files were listed, but only one had been attached. The 4 missing files stayed on Evelyn Grant's screen for less than a second before Michael Prescott reached across the glass table and closed the personnel window. "Those are routine attachments. Why aren't they here?" "Because the recommendation is already complete." The conference room lights reflected across his silver cuff links, clean and steady, while the hospital's voice remained faint through Evelyn's phone. Somewhere behind the doctor, a monitor kept sounding at even intervals, each tone reminding her that her father was breathing inside a room she could not see. Michael placed the tablet face down. "You should go to the hospital." Downstairs, the security door released with a dry electric buzz, and Isaiah Turner was led into human resources with his broken badge resting in his palm. Karen Wells rose from behind a pale wood desk and offered him a chair, as if she were welcoming him to a routine benefits meeting. "Mr. Turner, please sit. I'd rather stand. This will only take a moment." The room smelled of lemon cleaner and warm printer toner. 3 sheets of paper waited in a straight line beneath the fluorescent light. Termination of employment, final wage review, and cancellation of health coverage effective at 11:59 that night. Karen folded her hands. "I understand this may feel sudden. It is sudden. The company has procedures." Isaiah looked at the red stamp across the first page. Terminated for attendance. The ink was so fresh it had left a faint shine near the edge. Behind the glass wall, Doug Harris spoke quietly to 2 supervisors. Isaiah could not hear every word, but he caught "single dad excuse" and "always something." Karen followed his eyes, then lowered her voice in practiced sympathy. "We try not to discuss personal matters in disciplinary decisions. He is discussing mine in the hallway. Mr. Harris is explaining the staffing disruption. I was gone 8 minutes. The air conditioner clicked on above them, stirring the corner of the ambulance paper inside Isaiah's pocket. He removed it and placed it on the desk. The blood-marked thumbprint had dried into a dark crescent beside the handwritten unit number. Karen glanced at it without touching it. "You said you stopped for a medical emergency. A man had no pulse. Do you know his name?" "No." "Do you have a police report?" "Not yet." Karen slid the paper back with the cap of her pen. "Then, at this time, there is nothing independently verifiable." Isaiah kept his hand beside the paper but did not pick it up. "The ambulance unit is written there. We cannot call every number an employee gives us after an attendance violation." "Then you are not saying there is no proof?" His voice stayed low. "You are saying no one looked?" Karen's expression tightened for only a moment before the professional softness returned. She turned the second paper toward him. The company would hold part of his final paycheck pending a review of lost production time. The third page ended Layla's coverage at midnight. Isaiah read that line twice. His thumb moved slowly along the paper's edge, rough skin catching against the smooth coating. "My daughter has an appointment today. Coverage remains active until the listed time. Her follow-up treatment continues next month. You may receive information about continuation coverage by mail." "How much?" Karen hesitated before naming the monthly amount. It was more than half Isaiah's rent. Outside the glass, Doug smiled at something one of the supervisors said. Isaiah looked down at the broken badge in his palm. The plastic had split through his photograph, leaving half his face attached to the company name and half separated from it. "Keep her insured through the end of the month," he said. "I'm not asking for my job in this room. I'm asking you not to interrupt a child's care before you verify what happened." Karen straightened the papers until their edges aligned again. "The system does not allow me to extend benefits based on an unconfirmed story. Then confirm it. That is not how this process works." Maybe that is the problem. For a few seconds, only the printer hummed. Karen's pen slipped from her fingers and rolled beneath the desk. Isaiah bent, picked it up, and placed it beside her hand without comment. The small courtesy seemed to trouble her more than anger would have. She looked at the blood on his glove, then at the ambulance number, but still did not reach for the phone. Michael's email appeared on her monitor. "Mark ineligible for rehire before appeal window opens." She minimized it too late. Isaiah had already seen the subject line reflected faintly in the glass behind her. "Sign here to acknowledge receipt," she said. "Your signature does not indicate agreement." Isaiah signed his name, then wrote beneath it in careful block letters, "I dispute the stated reason and request preservation of all gate video, phone records, and original attachments." Karen stopped breathing for half a beat. Original attachments? The termination. Summary listed for. Her eyes moved toward the ceiling camera, then back to his face. Doug opened the door. "We're finished here." Isaiah folded the ambulance paper, placed it in his shirt pocket, and lifted his metal toolbox. As he stepped into the hallway, his phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number filled the screen. "I was on the ambulance crew this morning. I think I have a photo of you." Behind him, Karen reopened Michael's email and noticed something Isaiah had not seen. The message had been sent 11 minutes before he reached the factory gate. The message remained on Isaiah's screen as he stood beneath the humming hallway light. I was on the ambulance crew this morning. I think I have a photo of you. Doug noticed him stop and gave a thin, impatient smile. Another story? No. Then keep moving. Isaiah slipped the phone into his pocket without replying. The metal toolbox felt heavier now, not because of the tools inside, but because the folded insurance notice rested beneath them like a second weight. At the employee exit, an older maintenance worker named Leon was kneeling beside a broken caster on a supply cart. One wheel had folded inward, leaving 3 boxes of machine filters tilted toward the concrete floor. Leon looked up when Isaiah approached. They told me not to touch your station. This isn't my station. You know what I mean. 2 supervisors watched from across the corridor, speaking softly enough to pretend they were not watching. Isaiah set down his toolbox, removed a small wrench, and crouched beside the damaged wheel. You don't work here anymore, Doug called from behind them. Isaiah turned the loose bolt between his fingers. Its threads were stripped nearly smooth. Leon still does. Doug exhaled through his nose as if kindness were another form of disobedience. Facilities can handle it. Facilities won't get here before those boxes fall. Isaiah replaced the damaged bolt with a spare from his own kit, tightened the bracket, then tested the cart with both hands. The wheel rolled straight. Leon swallowed and looked away before his gratitude could become visible to the men across the hall. Isaiah closed the toolbox. Push from the low side until they rebalance it. You should be taking care of yourself. I am. Outside, the morning had sharpened. Wind moved wrappers along the curb and carried the smell of diesel from the loading docks. Isaiah sat on a concrete barrier and opened the ambulance worker's message again. A second text arrived with a blurred photograph attached. It showed him kneeling on the roadway, shoulders locked, both hands pressed against an older man's chest. The angle caught the cracked watch on Isaiah's wrist and the dark sleeve of his work jacket folded beneath the man's head. The patient's face was turned away. One hand lay open against the asphalt, a worn wedding ring catching a strip of pale sunlight. Isaiah stared at the image only long enough to confirm the man had been alive when Elena took it. He did not enlarge the ring. He did not study the car. He typed, "Is he still alive?" The reply came quickly. He made it to the hospital with a pulse. We were trying to complete the report. Can I use your name? Isaiah rested his elbows on his knees. Across the parking lot, Doug stood behind the glass doors, watching him with the detached curiosity of someone waiting to see whether a poor man would beg. Isaiah wrote, Isaiah Turner. Put down that I assisted until EMS arrived. No hero language. Elena sent back a simple thumbs up, then another line. You knew exactly what you were doing. Former medic? Isaiah looked at the cracked watch. For one brief moment, he remembered another pair of hands, smaller than Layla's were now, gripping his sleeve outside an emergency room years ago. His wife had already been gone by then, and Layla had asked why people trained to save lives could not save everyone. He had never found an answer that did not sound cruel. He typed, former rescue technician. A long time ago. Then he stood and walked toward his truck. Before opening the door, he noticed a lunch bag on the passenger side pavement, its zipper partly open. Inside were an apple, a folded napkin, and an envelope marked rent in black ink. Leon's name was written on the bottom. Isaiah looked back toward the factory. Leon was struggling to guide the repaired cart through the loading entrance while one supervisor criticized his pace. Isaiah carried the bag across the lot and placed it quietly on the hood of Leon's car, beneath the windshield wiper where it would not blow away. He did not call attention to it. He did not leave a note. By the time he reached Layla's school, dismissal traffic had begun to form. She climbed into the truck wearing her purple backpack and immediately noticed the broken badge on the dashboard. Did they fire you? Isaiah started the engine. They made a decision before they had all the facts. Layla touched the crack running through his photograph. Is that different? It can be. She studied his face, then reached across the console and placed her hand over his glove. Did the man live? He reached the hospital. Then you were where you were supposed to be. Isaiah looked through the windshield until the tightness behind his eyes passed. His phone vibrated again. Elena had sent a clearer copy of the photograph and a request from the hospital for his full statement. This time, Isaiah enlarged the image, not to see himself, but to check the patient's position and make sure he had remembered every medical detail correctly. Near the man's shoulder, half hidden beneath the folded work jacket, lay a small black recording device with a red light still glowing. At the bottom of Elena's message was one new sentence. The hospital says the patient tried to say a name before he lost consciousness. It sounded like Evelyn. The name Evelyn stayed on Isaiah's screen, while the school pickup line crept forward beneath the dull afternoon sun. Layla looked from the photograph to her father's face. Do you know her? No. Then why did he say her name? Isaiah locked the phone and placed it face down in the cup holder. The image had already complicated things enough. A stranger's name, a glowing recorder, and a photograph of him kneeling over an unidentified man could prove he had stopped. But they could also be made to look like he had inserted himself into a story that did not belong to him. At Grant Memorial Hospital, Evelyn stood beside her father's ICU bed, while a ventilator pushed measured breaths into Robert Grant's chest. The room smelled of antiseptic and warm plastic. His wedding ring rested against the white sheet, worn thin along one edge from decades of use. Dr. Samuel King held the emergency report near the window, where late light passed through the paper. The bystander started compressions at approximately 6:42. Do we have his name? Evelyn asked. A phone number. The ambulance crew is confirming it. Michael Prescott stood near the door with his jacket folded over one arm. He had come from the factory carrying the controlled concern of an executive who wanted to appear helpful without becoming involved. There are people who attach themselves to high-profile emergencies, he said, especially once they learn who the patient is. Samuel looked up. The rescuer left before your father was identified. That does not mean he stayed uninformed. It means we verify before we accuse. Evelyn's eyes moved to the report. The description listed a Navy work jacket, cracked wristwatch, and prior emergency training. Nothing about it proved motive. Nothing about it explained why the same man's name sat on a termination order she had signed less than an hour later. What was the time of the factory incident? She asked. Michael answered too quickly. 6:58. Samuel's gaze shifted toward him. I did not say this involved the factory. A soft alarm sounded from Robert's monitor, then settled as a nurse adjusted the sensor on his finger. Michael smiled faintly. You mentioned the rescuer was in work clothes. It was an obvious possibility. Evelyn did not challenge him, but her hand stopped halfway toward the bed rail. Across the hospital, Isaiah sat beside Layla in the outpatient waiting area. A folder of insurance forms balanced on his knee. A clerk had fastened a white hospital wristband around Layla's arm. The plastic was slightly too loose, and she kept turning it so the printed letters faced upward. It says the wrong middle initial, she whispered. Isaiah checked it. The initial was wrong, but the patient number and appointment date were correct. We'll have them fix it before we leave. He folded the insurance termination notice into quarters and placed it behind. The appointment paperwork. The red 11:59 p.m. deadline showed through the thin page. Samuel entered the waiting area carrying a tablet and stopped when he saw Isaiah's cracked watch. Mr. Turner? Isaiah stood. Yes. I'm Dr. King. I believe you assisted a patient this morning. Isaiah glanced at Layla before answering. Is he alive? He is stable enough for us to ask questions. Samuel studied the calmness in Isaiah's face, then the dried blood in the seam of his glove. You said he briefly regained a pulse before the ambulance arrived. For maybe 12 seconds. The crew report says 8. They reached him after it dropped again. Samuel tapped the tablet. That distinction had not been released outside the treatment team. Did he say anything? One name. Maybe Evelyn. At the far end of the corridor, Evelyn had stepped out of the ICU to speak with a nurse. She heard her own name and turned. Isaiah noticed the movement but did not recognize her. Michael, several paces behind her, did. "This conversation should happen privately," he said, moving between Evelyn and the waiting area. "For patient confidentiality." Samuel did not move. "I have not identified the patient." "You are about to." Isaiah's eyes lowered to the photograph still open on Samuel's tablet. He did not point to the man's face. Instead, he touched the edge of the screen near the patient's left hand. "Can you brighten that?" Samuel adjusted the image. The old wedding ring caught the overhead light. Evelyn's breath changed. It was the ring her mother had chosen 42 years earlier, the one Robert had refused to remove even after the marriage ended. Michael leaned closer. "Plenty of men wear plain gold bands." "That one is engraved inside," Evelyn said quietly. "RG and MG." Samuel enlarged the image further, but the engraving remained hidden against the asphalt. The clue was real, yet still incomplete. Then Layla, who had been tracing the numbers on her hospital wristband with one finger, looked at the timestamp in the corner of the photograph. "Dad," she said, "that picture says 6:43. Isaiah looked at the ambulance paper in his pocket, then at the cracked watch stopped. At 6:44, Samuel opened the electronic intake record. Robert Grant had been entered into the ambulance system at 6:47 a.m., 4 minutes after the photograph and 11 minutes before Isaiah reached the factory gate. Behind them, Michael quietly reached for his phone. Isaiah watched him and asked only one question. "If nobody at the hospital knew who that man was until after 7, how did you know this involved the factory before Dr. King ever said my name?" Michael's hand stopped halfway to his phone. For 1 second, the corridor seemed to narrow around Isaiah's question. "I oversee factory operations," Michael said. "When an employee involved in a disciplinary matter appears in the same hospital as Ms. Grant's father, I make reasonable connections. You connected it before Dr. King said my name. Mr. Turner, this is neither the time nor the place." Samuel shifted the tablet against his chest. The soft scrape of a waiting room chair stopped behind them, and even the air conditioner seemed louder in the pause. Evelyn looked at Michael, not with accusation yet, but with the first careful distance of someone realizing she had been given an answer too quickly. "Preserve the original intake report," she told Samuel. "And the photograph." Michael lowered his voice. "Evelyn, your father is in intensive care. We should not turn this into a corporate investigation based on coincidence. Then verifying it should cause no harm." Layla's fingers tightened around Isaiah's sleeve. He felt the movement and stepped slightly in front of her, not to hide her, but to remove her from the line between the adults. "She has an appointment," he said. "Whatever questions you have can wait until she is checked in." Samuel noticed the hospital wristband hanging too loosely around Layla's small wrist. "The middle initial is wrong," she said, holding it toward the clerk. "My dad said we should fix it." The clerk apologized and printed a replacement. Isaiah waited while she cut the incorrect band away rather than allowing it to remain in the record. Michael watched with faint impatience. A clerical error does not mean the entire system is compromised. Isaiah placed the discarded band on the counter instead of throwing it away. "No. It means small errors should be corrected before someone builds a decision on them." Evelyn's eyes moved from the wristband to the termination notice visible inside Isaiah's folder. She had not known his daughter's health coverage ended that night. Samuel led Isaiah into a private consultation room after Layla's intake, leaving the door partly open so she could sit safely with the nurse just outside. The room held a metal desk, 2 chairs, and a sink that smelled faintly of bleach. Samuel sat down and then signed emergency statement. "I need to confirm what happened before the ambulance arrived." "Ask." "The patient was bleeding from the mouth when you began compressions." "No." Samuel looked up. "You're certain?" "There was clear foam at the lips. No blood." "The report notes blood." "Then either the report is wrong or you are asking about another patient." Michael, standing near the doorway, folded his arms. "These details are subjective under stress." Isaiah did not look at him. The man's pulse returned once for about 12 seconds. His left hand tightened around my wrist. He tried to say a name. Then the pulse dropped again before the ambulance turned onto the road. Samuel's pen stopped. The brief return of circulation had been recorded only in a private treatment note, based on the cardiac monitor's downloaded data. Elena had not included it in the public summary. What did his breathing sound like? Samuel asked. Isaiah answered without drama. Wet at first, then shallow with a pause every few breaths. I moved his chin because his airway was closing. Samuel deliberately gave him the wrong position of the sedan. Isaiah corrected that too, explaining where the rear tire had rested against the curb and why he had placed his work jacket beneath Robert's head. The test lasted less than 4 minutes. By the end, Samuel no longer watched Isaiah like a man evaluating a claim. He watched him like a physician listening to another trained professional who had no interest in being praised. He pushed the statement across the table. The form described Isaiah's actions as a heroic civilian intervention. Isaiah crossed out the phrase and wrote emergency assistance provided until EMS arrival. Why change it? Evelyn asked from the doorway. Isaiah signed his name. Because the man needed help. I do not need a title for stopping. The room went quiet again. Layla, visible through the open door, loosened her grip on her backpack straps. Samuel compared Isaiah's signature, phone number, and description with Elena Morales' report. The number matched. The timeline matched. The private medical details matched. It was the first proof strong enough to establish that Isaiah had not invented the emergency. But it still did not prove the factory had deliberately ignored him. Michael recovered first. Then we acknowledge that Mr. Turner assisted someone. That does not automatically invalidate an attendance decision. No one said it did, Evelyn replied. She placed her hand flat on the ensign termination summary Samuel had printed from Isaiah's folder. I want the original factory records, not the executive summary. Gate footage, phone logs, email history, and every attachment listed when I signed. Michael's smile remained, but the color around his mouth had faded. We should handle that privately. There is no reason to let a personal tragedy create a misunderstanding about company policy. Isaiah looked at him for the first time since entering the room. Whose personal tragedy? Michael did not answer. Evelyn asked Samuel one final question. Did Mr. Turner know who the patient was when he helped him? Samuel looked at the corrected statement, then at the man who had removed every word that sounded like praise. He did not even ask his name. Evelyn slowly lifted the termination summary. At the bottom, beneath Michael's recommendation, was a timestamp showing the file had been prepared before Isaiah reached the factory gate. And beside it, in smaller print, was an internal routing code connected not to attendance but to employee benefit reduction. The employee benefit reduction code sat beneath Michael Prescott's recommendation like a small black door no one had intended Evelyn to open. She read it twice, then turned the page toward the hospital window where the pale afternoon light made the routing marks easier to see. This was not filed as an attendance case. Michael adjusted one cuff. Internal codes overlap. Then show me what this one means. Not here. The printer in the nurse's station stopped humming, and the sudden quiet seemed to travel through the consultation room. Isaiah remained beside Layla's chair, one hand resting on the handle of his metal toolbox. He could have pointed at Michael. He could have demanded his job back while Evelyn's anger was fresh. Instead, he folded the termination notice over the line ending Layla's insurance at 11:59 p.m. and said, "Before anyone explains the code, preserve the records." Evelyn looked at him differently then, not with sympathy, but with the attention given to someone who understood how easily evidence disappeared. She called the company's outside counsel and ordered an immediate legal hold on gate footage, phone logs, personnel emails, benefit reviews, and every attachment connected to Isaiah Turner. Michael stepped toward the corridor. "Evelyn, your father needs you. Corporate records can wait until tomorrow." "My father is alive because someone did not decide an emergency could wait." Samuel set Elena Morales' ambulance report beside the termination summary. The times formed a clean line across the table. Isaiah's 911 call at 6:38, compressions beginning at 6:42, the ambulance intake at 6:47, and the factory gate recording him at 6:58. The cracked watch in the photograph showed the same window. Michael's argument shifted without changing its polished tone. No one disputes that Mr. Turner helped a man, but a noble act does not erase an attendance policy. If you reverse this because the patient happens to be your father, every termination becomes vulnerable to claims of favoritism. The logic was cold, but not foolish. Evelyn heard the danger in it. Saving Robert proved Isaiah had told the truth. It did not yet prove the company had acted dishonestly. Then we separate my father from the case, she said. We determine whether the policy was followed before anyone knew who the patient was. Michael's jaw tightened. That investigation will create unnecessary exposure. Exposure to what? He did not answer. At the factory, Karen Wells received the preservation order just as her cursor hovered over the scheduled deletion folder for archived supervisor calls. The fluorescent lights gave her office glass a gray sheen. Doug stood beside her desk, smelling of coffee and machine oil. It was a 4-second call, he said. It never connected. Karen opened the carrier log. The call had connected. For seconds of audio existed, followed by a manual disconnect from Doug's company phone. You told me there was no call. I said he did not properly notify me. That is not the same sentence. Doug glanced toward the ceiling camera, then lowered his voice. Do not turn paperwork into a moral crisis. Karen searched Isaiah's personnel history. 17 years of strong evaluations appeared beneath one attendance warning entered that morning. She opened another recent termination, then another. The same phrase appeared in each. Attendance reliability concerns. A 58-year-old machinist dismissed after taking his wife to an emergency room. A warehouse lead terminated after leaving to identify his injured son at a highway patrol office. A maintenance electrician removed after missing a shift during dialysis complications. Each worker had carried higher than average insurance costs. Each file had been routed through the same benefit reduction code. Karen's hand remained on the mouse while the air vent rattled above her. Doug reached toward the screen. Those cases are closed. She moved the mouse away. They were closed the same way. Back at the hospital, Evelyn's legal counsel sent the first recovered document to her tablet. It was a spreadsheet labeled Workforce Sustainability Review. Isaiah's name appeared in a column with age, years of service, dependent coverage, and projected benefit expense. His row was highlighted red. Michael saw the screen and placed his phone face down so quickly that it struck the table. That is a planning document. It does not establish intent. Evelyn opened the next attachment. 12 employees had been flagged. 9 were already gone. 7 terminations cited attendance. Isaiah stood near the door, reading only what Evelyn turned toward him. There are other families, he said. It was not a question. It appears so, she answered. Layla looked up from the replacement hospital wristband now fitted correctly around her arm. Are there kids losing insurance too? No one answered immediately. Isaiah crouched beside her so she would not have to search adult faces for meaning. That is what they are checking. Michael exhaled and softened his voice. We should continue this privately. Public speculation could damage innocent people. Isaiah rose. Then do not speculate. Verify every file. Evelyn asked whether he wanted to make a formal accusation. Isaiah looked at the ambulance paper, the broken badge, and the photograph that had already proved enough to tempt anger but not yet enough to protect everyone else. I want the records finished before the story starts, he said. If you confront him too early, the people whose names are not in this room may lose the only proof they have. That choice silenced Evelyn more deeply than any demand could have. The man whose insurance had been cut was asking her to protect evidence for strangers before restoring his own. Karen called moments later. Her voice had lost its professional smoothness. She had found Michael's earlier email, sent before Isaiah reached the gate. One clean attendance termination saves us years of benefit exposure. Beneath it was a second instruction directing Doug to document the next actionable event. Evelyn looked through the glass wall at Michael's reflection. A bead of sweat moved from his temple toward his collar, though the room was cold. Then Karen said there was more. The gate camera had captured Doug reading Isaiah's blood-marked ambulance paper before ordering security to remove him. Evelyn closed the tablet. This cannot be handled in a private office anymore. On the screen between them, 12 red-highlighted names waited beneath Isaiah's, and by morning, every worker on that list would be summoned back to the gate where the first lie had been recorded. By 7 the next morning, the factory gate no longer looked like an entrance. It looked like a witness stand. Folding chairs had been arranged beneath the loading bay awning, facing a portable screen and a narrow table where outside counsel had placed 12 sealed personnel files. Union representatives stood along one wall. Supervisors clustered near the guard station. The workers whose names had appeared beneath Isaiah's on the red-highlighted spreadsheet sat together in the front row, holding folders, medical receipts, and old termination letters against their knees. Isaiah arrived without an attorney at his side or anger in his stride. He wore the same Navy technician's jacket, carried his metal toolbox, and held the broken halves of his security badge in one palm. Layla remained several feet behind him beside a hospital nurse who had agreed to accompany her until Robert's condition allowed him to travel. She wore her purple backpack and the correctly printed hospital wristband around her left arm. The steel gate stood open, but Isaiah stopped at the exact place where Doug Harris had closed it against him. Evelyn Grant waited near the portable screen with her father's small recording device secured in a clear evidence pouch. She did not greet Isaiah publicly. She did not announce a conclusion. She had promised the investigators she would allow each person to state what they had known before the final evidence was shown. Michael Prescott stepped forward first. His dark suit was pressed, his voice calm, his expression touched with regret. "What happened to Mr. Turner was unfortunate," he began. "But companies cannot operate through personal exceptions. At the time of termination, management had no verified proof of an emergency. The decision was consistent with the information available." A few heads nodded. The explanation sounded reasonable when separated from the blood-marked paper, the ignored call, and the prepared termination code. Michael continued, "Reversing discipline because the patient later proved to be related to our CEO would create the appearance of favoritism. This company must protect every employee from selective enforcement." For a moment, it seemed he had reclaimed the room. Even one of the union representatives looked down at his notes. Isaiah did not interrupt. Evelyn turned to outside counsel. "Show the first record." The screen displayed the photograph Elena Morales had taken at 6:43 a.m. Isaiah was on the pavement, hands locked over Robert's chest, his cracked watch visible beneath his glove. Layla looked at the image, then quietly reached for the nurse's hand. Michael nodded as if the photograph helped his argument. "No one disputes that he rendered assistance." "Then the time," Evelyn said. The next image showed the 911 call beginning at 6:38. CPR documented at 6:42, ambulance intake at 6:47, and Isaiah reaching the factory gate at 6:58. The times formed a straight line beneath the photograph. Michael spread one hand. Again admirable, but he did not complete the required notification procedure. Doug stepped forward when his name was called. He wore his supervisory badge and held a printed copy of the attendance policy. "I did not receive a proper call," he said. "A 4-second connection with no conversation is not notice. Mr. Turner arrived after shift start and produced an unverifiable scrap of paper. I followed policy." The screen changed to the carrier log. 4 seconds connected. Manual disconnect from Doug's company phone. Doug did not blink. There was no voice message. "Play the recovered audio," Evelyn said. Static filled the speakers, followed by Isaiah's breathless voice. "Doug, man down on Fulton. Ambulance coming. I'm going to be late." Then a click. The chairs stopped creaking. Doug looked toward Michael before correcting himself. "I may have heard part of it, but the line was unclear." Evelyn said nothing. Outside counsel displayed the gate camera. Doug appeared behind the glass, taking Isaiah's ambulance paper, turning it toward the light, and reading the unit number before handing it back. The footage had no sound, but the blood-marked corner was visible even from the security angle. Doug's explanation began to fracture. "A handwritten number is not verification," We could not stop production every time an employee claimed an emergency. Isaiah finally spoke. You did not have to stop production. His voice carried without rising. You only had to stop calling it a lie until someone checked. Michael stepped in before Doug could answer. This is becoming emotional. The company has already acknowledged procedural imperfections. There is no evidence anyone intended harm. It was his strongest defense yet. Mistakes could be corrected. Intent was harder to prove. Evelyn looked toward Karen Wells. Karen stood slowly, holding a flash drive and a printed email chain. Her face had lost the practiced softness Isaiah remembered from the HR office. I denied verification, she said. I told Mr. Turner the system could not act on an unconfirmed story. But the ambulance number was on my desk. The phone was beside my hand. I chose not to call. She placed the email on the table. And I received instructions to mark him ineligible for rehire before the appeal window opened. Michael's voice sharpened by a fraction. Those instructions were part of a broader cost control review. Evelyn gestured to the 12 sealed files. The one labeled Workforce Sustainability? The spreadsheet appeared. 12 names, ages, years of service, dependents, medical costs. Isaiah's row highlighted red. Michael lifted his chin. Insurance exposure is a legitimate business metric. It does not prove termination decisions were fabricated. For a second time, he seemed to have found ground strong enough to stand on. Then Isaiah placed his broken badge beside the first sealed file. Open theirs before mine, he said. If this is only about me, he can call it favoritism. If the same words were used against 12 families, then the pattern should speak for itself. One by one, the files were opened. The same phrase appeared across separate cases. Attendance reliability concerns. A machinist who had driven his wife to an emergency room. A warehouse lead who had identified his injured son after a crash. An electrician who had missed work during dialysis complications. Each name matched the benefit reduction spreadsheet. The workers in the front row did not shout. Their silence pressed harder than anger. Michael looked toward the exit, then toward the ceiling camera above the gate. We could not allow one emergency to become a precedent, he said. The sentence left his mouth before he could reshape it. Evelyn's hand settled on the recording device inside the clear pouch. You knew it was an emergency. Michael said nothing. Isaiah looked at the 12 workers, then at Doug and Karen. I am not here to trade their humiliation for mine. Put every record on the screen. Let the truth be complete. Behind the chairs, the hospital doors opened. Dr. Samuel King entered first, pushing Robert Grant in a wheelchair. Layla walked beside them, holding the hospital wristband in one hand and the CPR photograph in the other. Evelyn lifted the sealed recording device from the table, and Samuel reached toward the speaker controls. The last file had not yet been played. Samuel pressed play. For half a second, the speaker released only the low scrape of fabric and the thin electronic hiss of Robert Grant's recording device. Then Robert's voice entered the factory gate, weak but unmistakable. Evelyn, I should have told you years ago that I mistook providing for you for being present with you. I was coming to the plant because I did not want another birthday to pass with us speaking through assistants. A car horn sounded in the background of the recording. Robert inhaled sharply. Tires crossed gravel. Then the device struck something hard, and his voice disappeared beneath a sudden rush of static. The file ended. No one moved. Evelyn stood beside the screen with one hand covering her mouth. The recording proved why Robert had been on Fulton Road that morning. It proved he had been traveling toward the factory before anyone knew he would collapse. But the final truth was still resting in Layla's hands. The girl looked up at Isaiah before stepping forward. He gave one small nod. She did not address the workers or accuse the executives. She simply held out the photograph and the white hospital wristband she had kept since her appointment. Ms. Grant, she said. My dad wasn't late because he forgot. Her voice trembled once, then steadied. He was saving your father. Evelyn accepted the photograph with both hands. Under the hard loading bay lights, Isaiah was clearly visible on the pavement, his navy jacket folded beneath Robert's head, his cracked watch exposed above the glove stained with blood. Robert's wedding ring shone against the asphalt. The timestamp in the corner read 6:43 a.m. On the screen behind Evelyn, the factory camera still showed Isaiah arriving at 6:58. 15 minutes separated the two images. In those 15 minutes, one man had been kept alive and another had been reduced to a red disciplinary stamp. Samuel advanced the audio file from the 911 archive. Isaiah's voice filled the space, controlled and breathless. Male, approximately 70.
No steady pulse.
Starting compressions now. The dispatcher asked whether he knew the patient. No. Do you have identification? Nothing on him. Then, beneath the measured count of compressions, Isaiah's voice softened. Stay with me. Somebody is still waiting for you. Robert closed his eyes as he listened. His fingers tightened around the blanket over his knees. When the recording ended, he looked directly at Isaiah. That was your voice. Isaiah said nothing. Robert lifted one hand toward the cracked watch. And that was against my face when I opened my eyes. I remember the glass catching the light. Elena Morales stepped beside Samuel and identified the ambulance paper, the unit number, the photograph, and Isaiah's phone number in her report. Outside counsel confirmed that the gate footage, carrier logs, hospital intake, and 911 file had all been authenticated. Each item alone had left room for an excuse. Together, they left none. The projector fan became the loudest sound beneath the awning. A chair leg shifted once against concrete, then stopped. Karen's pen slipped from her hand and struck the table with a small plastic click. Doug stared at the security window instead of the workers he had addressed the morning before. Michael's folder tilted in his grip, several pages sliding halfway out before he caught them. The emergency was real, he said, but his voice had gone dry. That still does not establish that the broader review was unlawful. Evelyn turned toward the screen. The email appeared again. One clean attendance termination saves us years of benefit exposure. Beneath it sat the instruction to document Isaiah's next actionable event. The gate footage showed Doug reading the blood-marked ambulance paper. The phone log showed him disconnecting Isaiah's call. Karen's email showed the rehire ban ordered before the appeal window opened. And 12 sealed files showed the same method applied to workers with expensive family coverage. Evelyn lowered the photograph onto the table beside Isaiah's termination letter. The paper with the red stamp touched the edge of the image, showing his hands saving Robert's life. This was not consistent enforcement, she said. It was a cost reduction strategy disguised as discipline. Michael opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Evelyn faced the workers. Effective immediately, Mr. Prescott is suspended pending independent legal investigation. His access to company systems is revoked. Mr. Harris is removed from supervisory duty for falsifying and withholding material information. Every termination connected to this benefit reduction review is frozen and reopened. Karen looked down, waiting for her own name. Ms. Wells will remain available to investigators. Her authority over terminations is suspended until the review is complete. Evelyn then turned to Isaiah. Your termination is void. Your wages and benefits will be restored retroactively. Your personnel record will be corrected, and the company will reimburse every medical expense caused by the interruption we created. Isaiah did not smile. He did not look at Michael. He watched Layla release a breath and lower the wristband to her chest. Robert tried to rise from his wheelchair, pushing against the armrests with unsteady hands. Isaiah crossed the distance immediately and placed one palm beneath the older man's elbow. Sit back, sir. I need to shake your hand. You need to keep your blood pressure down. The quiet care in the sentence struck the room harder than triumph would have. Isaiah helped Robert settle, checked his breathing with one practiced glance, then stepped back beside Layla. Evelyn held out Isaiah's broken security badge. I want to offer you reinstatement and a senior emergency safety position. You would report directly to my office. Isaiah looked at the two cracked pieces but did not take them. His eyes moved instead to the 12 workers in the front row, to the medical receipts clutched in their hands, and to the name still glowing red on the screen. "I did not ask you to fix only my name," he said. Evelyn's hand slowly lowered. The gate remained open behind him, morning light stretching across the concrete where he had once been stopped. Everyone in that space now knew who Isaiah Turner was, what he had done, and what had been done to him. The only question left was what he would ask power to repair before he agreed to walk through that gate again. The crowd did not break apart all at once. Workers rose slowly beneath the loading bay awning, folding chairs scraping the concrete in uneven lines while outside counsel collected the 12 reopened files. No one cheered. The silence had changed from shock into something heavier, a shared understanding of how easily a rule could become a weapon when no one asked who it was hurting. Michael Prescott was escorted toward the administrative building after surrendering his company phone and access badge. Doug Harris removed the supervisor pin from his collar before walking past the same gate he had closed on Isaiah. Karen Wells remained at the evidence table, signing an acknowledgement that every affected termination would be reviewed by independent counsel and a union representative. Isaiah watched without satisfaction. When Doug passed him, the man's eyes stayed on the ground. "Mr. Turner," he said quietly, "I was doing my job." Isaiah held the 2 broken pieces of his badge in one hand. Then the job needed someone willing to do more than the minimum. He did not ask Doug to apologize in front of the workers. He did not make him stand beneath the camera and repeat what he had done. The evidence had already spoken, and Isaiah had no interest in replacing one public humiliation with another. Evelyn approached with a written reinstatement order, but Isaiah did not take it until she placed a second document beside it. The new document froze all attendance-based terminations connected to the benefit review, restored medical coverage during the investigation, and guaranteed back pay where records had been falsified or ignored. "This is temporary protection," she said. "The permanent policy will need board approval. Then put it in writing before the board meets." "I already have." She handed him a third page. It created paid emergency leave, required preservation of phone and camera records, and gave workers the right to appeal before insurance could be terminated. No supervisor could close an emergency-related case alone. Isaiah read every line. The other workers get representation, union counsel, and an outside reviewer. And the families who paid medical bills after coverage was cut? Evelyn met his eyes. Reimbursed if the review confirms the termination was improper. Only then did Isaiah sign the reinstatement acknowledgement. He declined the senior title she had offered. Instead, he agreed to serve on the safety council during paid hours, with the authority to represent workers whose emergencies might otherwise be reduced to a timestamp. Robert remained near the open gate, the small recording device resting in his lap. When the last investigator walked away, he looked at Evelyn and pressed the red button. His unfinished message played again, softer now without the crowd. He apologized for years spent sending gifts instead of showing up, for measuring fatherhood in tuition payments and emergency checks, and for assuming there would always be another birthday. Evelyn did not rush into his arms. She sat beside his wheelchair and listened until the recording ended. "1 dinner a week," she said.
No existence.
Robert nodded. "And counseling," she added. "If you mean this."
Ido.
Their second chance began without music, promises, or forgiveness offered too quickly. It began with a date written into a calendar and 2 people agreeing to return even when the conversation became uncomfortable. Layla sat on Isaiah's toolbox while a nurse removed the hospital wristband from her arm. "Can I keep it?" she asked. Isaiah looked at the thin strip of white plastic that had once marked the hour her insurance was supposed to disappear. "Yes." Weeks later, the wristband was placed inside a small glass case in the factory training room beside the blood-marked ambulance paper and a copy of the corrected emergency policy. The plaque underneath did not mention Evelyn's title or Robert's wealth. It read only, "A life before a clock." Isaiah's CPR photograph was used in safety training, but he refused to let the company turn it into an advertisement. His broken badge stayed in his metal toolbox beside spare bolts, electrical tape, and the wrench he had used to repair Leon's cart. It no longer represented the company's power to remove him. It reminded him that a man's identity could survive even when someone snapped the plastic carrying his name. On Isaiah's first morning back, the gate stood open before dawn. A younger worker named Marcus received a call near the guard station and went pale. His son had been injured during school athletics, and the emergency room needed a parent. Marcus looked toward the production floor, then toward the clock, caught between fear and the memory of what had happened to the men whose files had been reopened. Isaiah took the work order from his shaking hand. "Go. I'll lose the shift." "No, you won't." Isaiah entered the new emergency code himself and handed the form to Evelyn, who had arrived early to watch the policy take effect for the first time. She signed it without hesitation and arranged a company vehicle to take Marcus to the hospital. Layla stood safely beside Robert near the visitor entrance, holding Isaiah's lunch bag against her chest. She watched her father open the gate for another worried parent, then step back without waiting to be thanked. No one applauded. The conveyor belts started in the distance, the morning lights came on one row at a time, and Isaiah noticed a loose bolt on the gate hinge. He opened his toolbox, tightened it with 3 quiet turns, and walked inside. Behind him, the gate moved smoothly, not because power had finally decided he mattered, but because a good man had refused to let what wounded him remain broken for everyone who came after.